The Republican candidates may not think the whole European economy on the verge of catastrophe thing is worth mentioning when it comes to future threats to America. But you know who takes Europe, and specifically Germany, very seriously when it comes to their economic future? Alabama. The state has a very close, decades-long economic relationship with one big German company, Mercedes Benz. Mercedes chose Tuscaloosa, Alabama, for a new car plant back in the mid-90s. But Alabama almost didn't make it, because Mercedes was wary of the state's racial history. One big turnoff for the automaker? The Confederate flag. The flag flew atop the state capitol in Montgomery until 1993, despite much criticism in the late 80s and early 90s. And it was a point of such contention that in 1988, 14 African-American state legislators tried to break into the state capitol and physically remove the flag themselves. They got into trouble for that. But the flag was just too historically significant to remove from the Capitol, according to Alabama's Republican governor at the time, Guy Hunt. Enter Mercedes. The Germans weren't too keen on building an American base of operations in a state that so revered the Confederate flag. The flag came down in 1993, the same year Mercedes chose Tuscaloosa. According to this 1993 Associated Press piece, Mercedes officials said they never would have picked the state as an industrial base had the flag still flown at the Capitol, the state's top industrial recruiter. The Tuscaloosa plant has been vital to Alabama's economy since it opened in 1997. And one estimate suggests that it has brought more than 41,000 jobs to the state. That's why it was a big deal last week when Mercedes-Benz executive driving his rental car in Tuscaloosa was arrested for not having his passport. He left it back in the hotel. Oh, whoops. In Alabama, that's now illegal. It's a violation of HB 56, Alabama's new immigration law. Remember HB 56? The law has sparked protests since it went into effect a couple of months ago. It requires people to show proof of citizenship for every interaction with the state, things like getting heat and water. And many kids stopped showing up for school when the law first went into effect because of a provision mandating that schools must check their immigration status. And anyone helping an illegal immigrant, like a church, for example, would have been guilty of a crime. And the law is subject of at least 3 separate lawsuits. Now, a delegation of labor leaders and other civil rights activists visited Alabama recently to see for themselves how the law was affecting people's lives. One of those members was my friend, Elon James White, who discovered upon visiting Alabama that things were much worse than he'd imagined. White wrote recently that the law has created a culture of fear and suspicion where everyone is policing their neighbors. In one incident, a shopper went to make a cash purchase at a Walmart and was asked for identification. Now, unless it's alcohol or tobacco, you don't need ID to pay for something in cash. But in this climate, many believe it is allowable to ask for documentation anytime they deem reasonable. White noted, as have others, that farmers are losing fields of crops because so many immigrants have left the state. The broad climate of fear that will be familiar to those who lived through Alabama's first Jim Crow era, he wrote. At last night's Republican debate, the candidates almost drew a distinction between good immigrants, educated immigrants, those with graduate degrees, people like Albert Einstein, and bad immigrants, the ones we have to secure the border against, like people from Mexico. What's happening in Alabama is what happens when that kind of thinking becomes law. The arrest of the Mercedes executive caused Alabama lawmakers to stumble all over themselves to say, hey, that wasn't supposed to happen. Republicans who supported the law keep calling the arrest an unintended consequence. Quote, due to a number of unintended consequences, including this incident, Republican Governor Robert Bentley, a strong supporter of the bill, was considering revisions. But that arrest is exactly what was supposed to happen, even though Governor Bentley may not have intended for it to happen to a German executive from Mercedes, a company that has already shown its discomfort with Alabama's fraught racial history. The Daily Decatur of Decatur, Alabama, summed up the executive's arrest with, we think, a pretty awesome editorial. The people of our once hospitable state should send a thank you card to the Mercedes-Benz executive arrested Friday for violation of the immigration law. The German did more to demonstrate the idiocy of the immigration law in one day than the law's opponents have managed in months. We are guessing that Governor Robert Bentley has placed no urgent phone calls on behalf of Hispanics whose families were split up by the law. Yet he wasted no time calling the state's Homeland Security Director after the arrest of the Mercedes Benz executive in Tuscaloosa. We couldn't have said it better ourselves.